welcome. Thanks for coming on tonight. My name's Candace Brannon, and I'm an English teacher at Mandan High School. I've been teaching, this is my 20th year. I should say I teach 10th and 12th grade. And I was thinking tonight as I showed up, I thought, gosh, what if I'm bringing in poems that are for AP literature, and we have middle school teachers and elementary teachers, so I wonder how this will fly. So I wanted you to know that I'm also thinking of younger children too, just because I think about my own at home and what kinds of poetry can I bring them to. But you should be able to see through that link, there's a link to Clint Smith reading a poem, and I'm going to see if I can throw that on here for the whole screen for all of us. Hi, Nikki. All right, so this is a poem by Clint Smith, and it's just about a minute, but I'm going to let you take a listen to him reading it.
When Maze and Frankie Beverly come on in my home, Mom's eyes closed. She raises the spatula as if she were going to orchestrate the gumbo into existence, turns the knobs that we feel bass thundering in the walls. At the start of verse 1, she points to Pops, walks over, shoulders oscillating back and forth between the melody. Pops does the same dance he's been doing since '73. Left knee, right knee, pop, snap. Right knee, pop, snap. At the start of verse 2, Pops drops his shoulder, bites his bottom lip, and does some sort of spin move, pivoting on his left foot. When he does this, it's unclear if he hurt his back or if he's doing an unauthorized version of the sprinkler. The way his hands flip and turn and slap box the sky between them. The way Mom looks confused as to what exactly is happening, but she goes with it because she's fly like that and has never left Pops hanging on the dance floor. At the start of verse 3, smoke alarms are going off in the kitchen. Their hands are clasped now, fingers interlocked, swinging each other back and forth. Their feet are now music of their own. At the end of the song, Frankie's voice begins to fade, but they keep dancing. She holds her hand on the back of his neck. He pulls her in closer. She looks at him, kisses him between the sweat rolling down his forehead, and they laugh and laugh and laugh and laugh long after the song has stopped.
So that's Clint Smith. And I know the video kind of cuts in and you can't quite catch the title. And I think the titles are so helpful to hear. But basically in this poem, we have the speaker of the poem watching his or her parents sing this song in the kitchen together while they're at first cooking, I think. And then the song sort of takes over and they're both dancing and singing. So my question, just for icebreaker for us for tonight, is what is the song that if it comes on, you're up and dancing? So it's what's your get up and dance song? And if you can see that document there, you can type it in. I think you can add it as a comment. So once you have your songs, see if you can listen to your song and choose like 3, 4, 5 words that you think would fit the tone. So if someone said, well, I don't know that song, you could say, well, it sounds kind of, and then what would be the sort of the tone that you would use to describe it, like the emotion that you would use to describe it. But I like starting with music with students in my classroom because I think it's less intimidating than looking at the printed word on a page, looking at poetry that way. But I always, when I hear students say they don't like poetry, I say, well, maybe there are poems you don't like. But if you like music, you like poems, because music is a lot of poems that are set to music, right? When I ask my students to give me a tone for a song or even a tone in a poem, a lot of times what they come up with right away is it's happy or it's sad or it's something like that. And so I'm going to scroll down and just show you. We're going to come back up to some of those poems here. So this is something that we did, and it's kind of sideways on there. But I like working on these tone posters as a way to expand vocabulary, but also to think about how happy is it, or even in our own discussion, like, so you're sad, you had a bad day, how bad was it? How sad are you? How happy are you? And so I stole these paint cards from Lowe's and any place else where I could abscond with some of their paint cards. And I just had them in all different sort of colors. And they chose different words, and then they had to think of synonyms for it. They could use, I asked them to try to do it first without using Googling things, but then eventually they did. And they worked in tonal intensity. So starting with happy, they started with content. And then they tried to move in degrees up towards like absolute ecstasy, I guess, which was what they said was heavenly. But their words were content, and then joyful, blithe, gleeful, gay, delightful, triumphant, felicitous, and heavenly. And then they did those. So each team had like different words, and they'll do that. We have them all around our room. I bet I have 20 of these on my wall, and they'll look at one of these and they'll say, well, the tone here is sad. And I'll say, well, what else can you say besides sad? How sad is this? And then they'll come up with sometimes a word off there. Sometimes they'll say, like, we need another tone poster to figure out what the tone is. So those are just a couple samples, but it was a really fun activity to do with my students so that they could think about how, what degree of tone or what degree of sadness could they find. So I'm just gonna throw that out there for you quickly. If this were in my class right now, I'd probably have us go back to, or maybe we team up and choose like one of these words and make our own kind of list of, so if I said it was energetic, or a couple of us said it was upbeat or happy, what else could we find for 10 words? How happy or how upbeat or how positive was it? So that's a great place for me to start with convincing my students that poetry is approachable. Do students in your classrooms like poetry, gravitate towards poetry, or are they kind of pushing back against it? Like, is there a negative vibe towards it or a positive vibe towards it?
It's generally not a fan favorite in my classroom, but we like to make the most fun out of it that we can. And I feel like they enjoy the poem by the end.
So you'll catch them.
Yeah.
How about first graders? Do they do a lot of poetry?
My kids are loving poetry more this year than they ever have. And I think it's because my attitude has changed. I'm approaching it differently and more excited about it. Cool. But they are enjoying the poetry that we do in a shared reading experience. They do love it.
Okay. Eddie, do your students like it out there?
It varies from group to group and age to age, certainly. But we're trying poetry out loud this year for one of my classes, and it helps to provide an extra outlet for those who do like it. That's one thing I've found so far is I'll have kids come up to me and be like, okay, now what do we need to do to move forward so that we can do well?
Yeah, and I think, whatever ways we can tap into whatever it is that they like first with poems, so that's, I guess, why I sort of like the music. I had a student in my class, he's a rap artist, and he would say, yeah, I don't like poetry. And then he would show me his lyrics, and I would say, okay, Vaughn, this is a poem. This is a poem, whatever you want to call it, this is a poem. So one of the things that we did this year that my students really loved was we did this Where I'm From poem. Have you heard of this one before? So Kwame Alexander, who's, he's written, what is it? The One and Only Ivan. Is that Kwame Alexander? I'm pretty sure that's him, middle school, young adult literature. He works for NPR, and he does all kinds of different things for them with poetry. And so this is a poem called Where I'm From, and I'm gonna just play a portion of this. And this was something that I played for my students.
I'm Rachel Martin, and this is Poets in Chairs Sipping Tea. I just invented that.
And I'm Kwame Alexander, and I like that title, but You know, we kind of need a proper name for our segment, something literary and cool.
Literary cool with a little, maybe a little British bent to it. Maybe not sitting in chairs sipping tea, but something, right? Because
Right.
you're in London for a little while, roaming, writing. How's it going over there?
Rachel, the food is delicious. The theater is electrifying. The buses and the tube are crazy convenient. My job is sweet. My colleagues are fascinating, but I haven't found a barber yet.
I mean, it's radio, so people don't necessarily know this, but you don't have a lot of hair.
Shape up and shave, Rachel. It takes a lot of work to look fly for radio. But in the meantime, in between time, we were last together.
Yeah.
We asked listeners to write a Where I'm From poem.
Right. So you were supposed to do this where I'm from, drawing on all 5 senses, sharing your own remembrances, and using those memories of the people and places you came from to craft a poem.
We had close to 1,400 submissions. How cool is that?
Super cool. I'm so glad so many people were inspired by this.
Yep.
You then took all of those works and you compiled them into another morning edition community poem. And I can't wait to hear it.
Oh, I can't wait to share it. It's pretty magnificent.
All right. So before we do so, before we unveil the masterpiece, I've got a little surprise for you about how this all unfolded. You want to hear it?
What? I love surprises.
I know you do.
Okay,
So,
I'm sitting down.
remember the excerpt that we shared as an example for our listeners?
Yep, we shared the original, the first ever Where I'm From poem, which was written by Appalachian poet George Ella Lyon.
Right. Okay. So check this out. Listen to the phone message we got.
This is George Ella Lyon. I was amazed and delighted to hear you read part of Where I'm From on Morning Edition. I love that you invited listeners to write their own poems and send them in. My poem, written in 1993, was inspired by a poem of Jo Carson's. Her poem took off from something she heard somebody say. So, Where I'm From has been a pass-it-on phenomenon from the get-go. Here's to the power of poetry and place, and to the voices in all of us that long to be heard.
My mind is officially blown. My writerly world is rocked.
Isn't that amazing? It was very thoughtful. It was so cool that she took the time to call in like that. She even recited a poem, which is on the NPR website. Everyone should go check it out.
There we go.
George Ella Lyon is listening to us, Rachel. I mean, now I hope this community poem I've culled together is good, that it honors her brilliance.
I'm sure it will, but let's read it. You ready?
Okay, so here's the poem. And just as you're listening, if you have a like scratch paper on the side, scribble down any parts that you like, or draw a little picture or something that you like, or just listen.
That it honors her brilliance.
I'm sure it will, but let's read it. You ready?
I am.
Okay, this is how it starts. I am from travelers and adventure, from be seen not heard, from ritual and plain song, from England and exile, from mint sauce and lamb.
I am from casseroles and canned tuna, Kennedys and Saturday morning cartoons. I am from Tang in a Daffy Duck glass, from wall phones with mangled cords stretched during private calls in a room too far. I come from popcorn ceilings, dining rooms of glossy mahogany.
I am from bed sheets draped over our dining room chairs, from the trees littering the backyard, the sweet taste of mulberries staining my fingers red. I'm from big hats under rainbow umbrellas, buckets of wet sand and unstable castles. I'm from orange and vanilla custard, with a pizza slice the size of your chest, from hot July days and cool summer nights. I'm from Sunday night pizza and Monday night football.
I am from marbles, from empanadas cooking on the street. I am from orchids and mango trees. I am from La Torta, Tres Leches, and Ruana. I am from happy and serious, from hard work and sweat.
I'm from grit, respect, and discipline, from big family reunions and endless laughs. I am from houses never locked, from the projects in Brooklyn, and dominoes in the park. I am from salsa and the car horns blaring.
I am from diners and malls and accents that put an awe in coffee. From silky lingerie and sweat socks, bruised knuckles and scars I gave myself from longing to be someone, somewhere else. I am from a mother who was still a girl, whose beauty kept her shy. I am from dirt and fences, from strength and toughness.
I am from ashes flicked into the tray, the despair of divorce, bonds gone unappreciated, eviction and being thrown away, running and begging to stay. I am from a little girl who just needed a break.
I am from a time when my mother went to the hospital and never came back, when my toys were in a box by the curb as we drove away. I am from singing in the darkness of night, putting myself to sleep with the sound of my own voice.
I'm from playing backyard baseball with tennis balls, wiffle balls, even roundish gourds, from weekend sleepovers, from orange push-ups, from fallen leaves kicked up in swirls on walks to school, from early morning radio announcements of a snow day, no school.
I am from the South and the North, from immigrant grandparents and Civil War soldiers. I am from the red dirt clay of Virginia, from the sounds of the fiddle to the beauty of a choir, from the jig and the reel to the cloggers and the dancers, from collard greens and fatback, chitlins and white bread. I'm from hymns learned on Sundays, hypocrisy displayed on Mondays.
I'm from Tom Petty and baby oil in the hot sun, rye bread and salami. I'm from black cows, tacos, bicycles, and the gentle lure of crickets.
I'm from James Brown and Santana, from grooving on a Sunday afternoon and crystal blue persuasion.
I'm from endless steppes, from California and Texas and Durango, Colorado, from unknown ancestors of the ancient Southwest, cliff dwellers and Puebloans. I am from the earth.
From cityscapes and sleepy suburbs, from cicada clicks and firefly sparks, from the call of books and breathing through struggles, I am from you.
And you are from me. We are love.
We are home. We are from this day forward.
That was a good one, my friend. That was a good one.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, it always makes you feel better about the future. I don't know.
All right, I'm going to stop it right there. What did you notice about that poem? What were the things that grabbed your attention?
I liked how different their answers were.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it truly showed that they really are from somewhere different.
Mm-hmm. I didn't catch right at the beginning. Did they say they had 1,400 submissions for this poem?
I don't know.
I think that was what it was right at the start. He says, so NPR put out this call. He shared a similar poem by George Ella Lyon and said, hey, here's the poem. Why don't you write one like it and send it in? And then Kwame sort of just crowdsourced this gigantic poem from all these different people and took little bits and pieces. And you hear such a range. Yeah.
And it's so cool because some was food, some was how they were raised, some was location. It was just, I appreciated that.
Yeah.
And as part of the formula, you mentioned, I think, Candace, that it was supposed to be like the 5 senses. So some of that is a little bit prescriptive in what they ask people to provide, or was that just what people provided?
I think that was just a range of, I didn't see all of the ones that they sent in, but so if you go to that document again,
mm-hmm.
So there's a poem that I had not, before this, I had not heard the George Ella Lyon poem. The one that I had a copy in my hands that has kind of run through our school system is this poem by Fred First, and just called Where I'm From. So if you scroll down a titch, you'll see that. And it starts with, I'm from the peaceful banks of a creek with no name, from JFG, toast and blackberry jam and homemade granola. And so he goes through this whole poem. And I used to be really prescriptive about this with my essential English students. I would say, all right, so your first one needs to have like some kind of place, maybe outdoorsy. And it looks like a couple of foods, maybe something homemade or something simple. And then your next stanza should be something about your home. It should be physical. And then something maybe not physical about the host, a room filled with good ghosts. So we would go through, and then I would stop telling them, and I'd say, what do you think that third one? I am from Liriodendron and Lindera, butterfly bush and mountain. I think that should say bloomers. I think that's a typo in there. And so then they would start to look for, like, what's the recipe for this poem? We talked a lot about, when you go out to eat and you eat something fabulous, you have some like delicious thing at Noodle Zip, and it's this fantastic soup that's kind of spicy with I don't know what else. And you sit there and you think, how could I make this at home? So we talk about approaching poetry that way. When we read a poem, looking at what did the author do if I was going to imitate a poem and write like this, what would I have to do, or what would you have to do? So then they would go through stanza by stanza, and they'd say, okay, so it's something about this butterfly bush and mountain bloomers, Liriodendron, somewhere along the line. Maybe somebody would Google it, or somebody would say, that sounds like a science name. The next one's relatives, and specifically grandparents. And when I just did this one, most of my students played it pretty safe. They didn't take a lot of risks in being too vulnerable. They shared spaces and places and families and food. But when I played the Kwame Alexander one, and we put big categories on the board like music, food, seasons, geography, things people have said, games we played when we were growing up. We made all these different categories. And then they looked for things in their own life, treated that like writing territories, and started brainstorming those things. But the thing that my students heard in the Kwame Alexander poem was that they heard things like, I'm from a mother who went to a hospital and never came back, or I'm from running away and begging to stay. I'm from eviction. So they heard things where they said, I mean, we got done and they were like, whoa. And I said, what do you mean, whoa? And they said, well, I can't believe some of the things that they would write about. And they really liked that. And so we talked about that vulnerability and sort of sharing those stories. So if you scroll down, this is what my essential English students wrote. And I should clarify, these are 10th graders, but their testing ranges from new speakers from Puerto Rico who are speaking and reading English at a first grade level, to English students who have disabilities in language and are reading at a third and fourth grade level. So we're all across the board from first, third, fourth, all the way up through about ninth. Each of them are at least 2 grade levels below. But this is the poem that they came up with. And maybe we could just each take a stanza so that I don't have to just do all the talking here. But I kind of want you to hear what they said and what you notice about that. So can we just start? I don't know, I'll let you just jump in. You want to grab one of those?
I'll start.
Okay.
Where I'm From, a collective poem by 33 Mandan high school students, edited by Miss Brannon. I am from a small, quiet town to the bigger town of the black and white Mandan Braves. I'm from the ghetto, crying mother, and disobedient brothers. I'm from the core of 50 states and dirty dish plates. I'm from a house filled with laughter and hours of building forts in the living room. I'm from Grandma's house and an old 2-bedroom apartment. I'm from a house with lots of steps to another house with steps. I'm from a trailer house with gardens and trees. I'm from chickens that follow me wherever I go, driving me crazy, and a rooster that wakes me up on weekends.
We don't have to read it all. If you guys are like, nope, I don't want to read out loud, that's okay too. The second stanza was kind of about places, and it ranges from Louisiana, North Dakota, also seasons, Puerto Rico, a lot of outdoor things. And the third stanza, and so they, by the way, theirs came in all over the place. I didn't tell them they had to write it in any order. And then when they sent them in, then I kind of sorted them, I guess. But this was their memories of growing up, the third one. I heard about elementary and kids' movies and cats and dogs, and this line about being a carefree, confident kid. The next one, I heard this trend in accidents and sprained ankles and busting chins open and road rash and dirt bike crashes. And then the next one was music. This was actually one of my favorite ones, just because it ranged from heavy metal music to country music, to pop and rock and reggae, salsa, maranga, bachata, hip hop, don't stop till your feet pop. I love that line. Classical music, church music. I'm from the guitar and Bad Bunny and his Bad Bunny baby. I don't even know what that means. I had to ask the kid that wrote it. I was like, what the heck? And he said, oh, he's a rapper. And whenever he raps in his song somewhere, he says something like Bad Bunny baby. So that was new to me, but polka and accordion music. And the next one was cars. And the next one was work. And this is where it kind of, every now and then there'd be these sort of shifty lines in here. Where was it? I'm from stalling on my homework and the jail that is English class. So I was like, oh, great. But I also like that he was willing to write that and say that. I'm from causing trouble. I loved this one. I'm from the garbage dump behind the floral shop where I salvaged roses and daisies from my mom until I was caught. I'm from wearing my hat to class. And then this next one's all on sports, but even in the sports one, and it sounds really fun and really positive. And then that last line, I'm from skating on ice with my best friend taken from me by a single gunshot. I'm from a broken heart to a patched up soul. I'm from making friends to losing them to the next day. And here's where it kind of, I hear these shifts in tones where at first it seemed sometimes kind of random, sometimes kind of celebratory, and then now it seems a little bit darker. And you hear the struggles with friends and losing people. I love this stanza. I'm from Bendición and Deus te bendiga, just because I have so many students in the class that speak Spanish, and so I like that there are people that threw those in there. And then that sense of faith and words being spoken down and powwows and sweats and a temple and from small church meetings. I just thought that was neat. And then it was all these different foods. And then this one was kind of a mix of good and bad memories and everything from alcohol addiction and parents fighting to peaceful places and parents who are like superheroes. So there's some complexity to it, I guess, which I thought was really cool. Once we had this all put together, the thing that I really loved was we took turns reading it. So it's anonymous and no one had to say like, hey, I wrote that line. Sometimes kids jumped out and claimed lines because they were proud of them. But sometimes they would read lines and they might not read their own. And we just circled around the room. I have 2 sections, so there's about 15 in each class. And the thing that I think is so cool about this kind of poem is that at first it's an expression of themselves, but then when it's crowdsourced like this, it's an expression of each other. And there's some kind of really cool community that comes from doing that. So would you choose, and just because I think it's neat to practice it, practicing and doing things is how I remember how I want to teach things. So I'm going to give you a second. Would you like to scribble a little or type it in here? If you had to add a sentence to any one of those paragraphs or stanzas, maybe it's music or maybe it's food or maybe it's something you remember playing when you were little. Or maybe you can create that tension. If you could add a line to any of those stanzas, what would you add for yourself? So I'm going to shush and let you think of a line you would add somewhere in that poem. So I love all the things that everybody has thrown up there, and we could work on this as long as we wanted to. But one of the things that I think is cool when we do this with students is that they start to notice the writer's structure and also the writer's tone, and that it's interesting to have a writer who will share tension in their poem. And it's hard to, like right now, just with people that we've just met for a few seconds, sit down and pour out the depth of where we're from. But students, I think, will do that if we give them some time as individuals to just work on their own and think about being as truthful as they can in those statements. And they say some pretty amazing things. So my 2 favorite things about poetry are that strategy about reading like a writer. So find poems that you love to read and love to teach, and then how could you imitate them, or how could your students imitate them? Just like we did with that just like we did with that Where I'm From poem. So we'll do that sometimes in my class. This Georgia Hurd is a poet, and she says, how do you know when you have a poem? And she said, whenever she has a really strong physical feeling. where because of a feeling. So she's so happy she wants to cartwheel or skip, or she's so angry that she's clenching her jaw, or whatever it is. She said, when I have a feeling like that causes a physical reaction, then I know there's a poem there. And so I try to paint that picture of what was happening instead of naming the feeling. I just try to describe what that moment was. So a question I'll ask my students a lot is, has anything happened lately where you've had a feeling that caused a physical reaction in your body, and what would that be? Can you add to that list? Can you make that list? Can you add to that list? That's your writing field. That's where you have stories and poems to write about. So let me scroll down a little titch. So 2 poems where we've done that in class is this Sonnet with Bird by Sherman Alexie. And it's kind of a longer poem. And then this other poem, so we wrote the recipe for it. This was what my students came up with. And then here's kind of a younger and easier poem by Eloise Greenfield. Have you heard this poem, Honey, I Love? My 3rd grader loved it so much. Actually, I think she might have been in 2nd grade, Becky. And she memorized, it's a different poem by Eloise Greenfield, but it's in that little book. I'm trying to think of what it's called. But there's a link to that, that poem right there. Do you guys use spoken word poetry in your classrooms?
I haven't very much. I think it's just my own, and this is an ironic fear as a theater teacher. I think it's my own insecurity in it. But in just listening to you and like listening to the first poem you played, it was a great reminder, and it connects back to the Poetry Out Loud chat that we had a couple weeks ago, of just that, I mean, poetry really is written to be heard.
Right.
I mean, it is like theater, it is like a song in that way. And that, yeah, I need to get over my own fear, because I'm depriving my students of doing something that could really help them break into poetry, so to speak.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's easier to hear tone. You know, we talk about tone is like, sometimes a parent will say to a kid, like, don't take that tone with me, or don't take that attitude. And I think it's sometimes easier for students to hear when it's verbal versus when it's just on print. And then when they get really good at listening to it, then they also, I think it helps and translates. I'm not going to go back through just for the sake of time, but the Sonnet with Trees is my imitation of Sherman Alexie's Sonnet with Bird. But you could do that with any poem you like, and it would be a fun one to do with the Honey, I Love one as well. I wanted to ask you, how do you find poems to pair with texts you already teach? So I don't necessarily want to have poetry be its own individual unit that I only touch when I hit poetry, but because I like texts that talk to each other, right? So if I'm reading a novel with my students or a play with my students, I think it's interesting to hear a poem that might talk about a similar theme or subject matter. And then we can kind of compare, like, how does that writer sound in this poem as compared to how this writer sounds in this play or something like that. So have you found ways to dig up poems or find poems that you like thematically, or how do you do that? Where do you go to look for poems, I guess? That's my question.
I should probably connect my poetry more to my novels and things like that I read. However, I have one big, huge book of poetry, and we kind of compare those different authors.
Okay.
Rather than the poetry authors to the, the novels or short stories that we had been reading.
Sure.
I find them on Teachers Pay Teachers, of course.
Mm-hmm. I really like, I'll put a shout out on Twitter, and I'll say, what do you guys, any ideas? I'm teaching The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Any poems you would recommend for this? And sometimes I'll get them that way. But I wanted to show you this website. This is poets.org. And so this is a really cool way if you have something you're teaching right now. So really just quickly, what's a novel or a short story or something that you're in the middle of right now?
Of Mice and Men.
Mice and Men, okay.
We just got done with To Kill a Mockingbird.
Okay. So I'll go to find poems, and then I'll scroll down and I can search by themes. So Eddie, what would be a theme, or Becky, what would be a theme from one of your books?
Racial injustice.
Injustice. So it might not be up, it might not like say it exactly that way. If you see it on here, tell me to stop, or Eddie, if you see one on here, tell me to stop.
We look at friendship in Of Mice and Men, the friendship with George and Lenny. I saw friendship up there.
Okay, I was looking to see if there's anything in here on racism, or I see slavery, social justice.
Sadness, maybe a little bit, or social injustice would be a good one too.
Mm-hmm.
So you can kind of look here. I also sometimes will just throw my students and say, hey, we just finished reading The Road, so would you go in and look for poems and find a topic that you think might be relatable? So I just clicked social justice, and then this is what comes up. So boys, there's a whole list of poems here. And there's actually pages and pages, 6. I don't know how many pages there are. So sometimes the titles might help me. And so these would be more, not for our first graders, but I sometimes wonder if there's a way that students can find those connections. So this is under here, under social injustice, but I also see sadness in this one too. How to dismantle a heart. So that's just one way where I'll search for poems thematically, or sometimes let me search for poems old analysis of one. That might be a good place to do one too.
Do they have activities to go with the poems too?
So the only thing I've just started using this, and I'll just say, can you tell me how this poem connects to something that we're reading? And then what are some things that this poem has that might be different than what we're hearing in the novel? And where are their connections? So it's just comparing and contrasting. But I like it for finding poems. I'm gonna just scroll back through this page that I shared with you, this document. There's a really cool strategy on considering diction and imageries in poetry using concentric circles. So you make like a bullseye, and in the center of the poem, you ask the kids kind of a deceptive question. You say, what's the most important word in this poem? Which I think is kind of a trick question. And in the center of the poem, they put that concrete word. And then around it, they put images and personal connections. And then outside, they start writing thematic statements. And then even around it, they can start to put like quotes from the poem or evidence from the poem that make them think those things. So that could even be like a fourth circle. I think that's a good hands-on way to get students kind of into the poems a little bit in a grittier way. But this is where I'll stop tonight. This is kind of the last thing I just wanted to share. It's the March Madness Poetry Tournament that we do. And so we'll draw this gigantic chart, this basketball chart that we normally see in the middle of March. And on one side, we'll have spoken word poems, and on the other side, we'll do the written word poems. And at first, it's spoken words just up against other spoken word poems on like the left side. And then when it gets down to the championship, we'll have the class favorite spoken word poem, and on the right side, we'll have the class favorite written word poem. And then they sort of face off against each other. And sometimes we do them just for fun, like just for votes. And sometimes we say, like, give support why you think this is a better poem. And so they have to do some arguing. And this is just my list of spoken word poems that I've used sometime. I really love Sarah Kay. I think she does some really fun ones. The one that wins that they love every year is this one called Knock Knock by Daniel Beatty. I'm going to highlight that one if you haven't heard that one. It's super powerful. I think middle school students would love it for sure. And then I gave a list of some written word poems. just some of my others. So it's a lot of recommended poems. And then after that, it gets crazy bananas. In the last year, I found Twitter. And I started just liking poems that I would find. And so this is kind of my collection of poems that I've found from Twitter. So it's 60 obnoxious pages, but it's all the poems that I love right now on Twitter that I found probably in the last year or so. I wanted to ask, what are some good poems that you would recommend for middle school?
My kids really like Edgar Allan Poe. And I can't remember the author off the top of my head, but they really enjoy the Jabberwocky poem.
Is that Lewis Carroll?
Yes.
Yep.
There we go. You are correct.
You know, the Raven, I wonder if I threw it somewhere on here. This is my buddy Eric Sanders from Grand Forks gave me a podcast. He's like, this is my present to you. You're welcome. It's right here. It's this literary happy hour. Okay. And that one has a reading so they do 1 week, they'll do a reading of a poem, and then they'll follow it up with analysis and discussion of the poem. And they have Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, and the voice that reads it is magnificent. Like, you just have to hear it. It's so good. It's like the perfect voice for it. But their discussion of it on the following day is really good as well. So literary happy hour is fantastic.
There's another Sarah Kay one that that I was thinking of that I didn't see on your list, and it's her and another guy. It's not her and Phil Kay. It's one about it's like something like silenced voices or something like that, where it's her and this other guy poet, but she reads his and he reads hers, and they flip back and forth, and it's about how women feel silenced, and then also he's Black, and so then having a person of color being silenced as well, and so they swap those roles, and that's a really powerful one too, but I don't remember what it's called offhand.
If you find it and you want to send it to me, I would love to hear it. I'm going to just share out my my Twitter page is at C. Marie Bird. And so I'm kind of always crazy about collecting these poems, or you can add it just to a suggestion to this document as well. So if you have any favorite poets that you love, or poems or strategies that you really like for teaching poetry in your classroom, I'd love to hear them. For my students, or even for my own little kids. Thanks everybody for coming out tonight.
Yeah, thanks for these ideas. These are several of the activities were brand new. Thank you.
Have a good night, everyone.
Good night.
Bye. Bye.